Okay, Nara, go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabishalieva, and along with co-host Dr. Victor Fetch, Dr. Stefan Scholberlein, and also our program producer, Professor Larry Sherrod. And we host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war in Ukraine with guests from Ukraine and many other countries. We invite academics, we invite artists and practitioners. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and IT for making this a weekly event possible. And please free to use the chat to post any questions for our guests. Our discussions are available on YouTube, on Facebook, and Marshall University website. And a quick greeting to our viewers in former Soviet Union. Добро пожаловать, присоединяйтесь к нашей дискуссии. Наши еженедельные дискуссии вы можете найти на YouTube, на веб-сайте университета, Маршалл университета и на Фейсбуке. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett. Please turn off your mics and video cameras. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from Marshall University, West Virginia. It is tomorrow 150 days of the awful war for our generation. And we continue here on Ukraine Group with weekly presentations. We find people across the world from Ukraine, but not only people who are abroad now, away from Ukraine, away from Russia, academic researchers in US. And in these searches, we come across absolutely marvelous and unique personalities. So I'm very glad, I'm happy to introduce today our only speaker for today. It is probably a superstar of Russian language science education, to whose podcasts I have been listening for the last couple of years, Ilya Kolmanovsky. Welcome, Ilya.
Hello, and happy to be here.
I will ask you to introduce yourself, to say first a couple of words about yourself as a basic introduction, and then the microphone is yours. But we, of course, would like to hear your personal story to the extent you can share it with everyone. Feel free to stop, and it is informal, so we may ask questions. We will not interrupt you until you tell us to. But I'm afraid that today science education and even mole rats are not our primary subject, but you're welcome to tell us about those also. We are mostly interested here to hear you as a person from the generation which has been raised essentially under current Russian regime. Me and my generation are previous ones who left Russia back in the 70s or 80s or early 90s. We have not seen personally. We may not have been in Russia very often, but you formed and you grew up right now, and for you it is much more your own history than for many others. Please.
Thank you very much, and again, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here. And I didn't prepare any speech, so I'm most open to any questions. But, well, briefly, I'm a science observer. I'm a podcaster and editor, writer, presenter, showman. And like you said, I was born and raised in Russia. I would say that my generation was mostly formed by perestroika and 1991 democratic revolution in Russia. And we unfortunately were to witness the political situation gaining that backward momentum since late 90s. So as an adult person, I comfortably assumed that position, which I think was typical for Russian intelligentsia from what would you say, 1840s, starting from the rule of Nicholas I of being opposed to the government, opposed to regime, but also witnessing the window of opportunity, of possibility to influence what's going on, narrowing and collapsing. My family, we knew that we won't be able to live there forever. And for the last 15, 20 years, we've been more and more spread out and more sort of internationally based. And I would say, like sportsmen say, today they often perform without a national flag. So I used to live without a national flag for most of my career. And so I never represented the state, and I never dealt with state, never had any business with state. But I am attached to language, like I've mentioned, and Russian audience became very global over my journalistic career. It actually started with a project which was aimed at global Russian audiences, and the very concept, global Russian, was something formative to me. That outlet where I worked and where I was editing science part was called SNOB, unfortunately. It's an acronym which stands for something I don't even remember what, but it was quite well accepted in the international audience. So I think that's my story briefly. Now, my main project is called Naked Mole Rat. I think this is why Victor mentioned mole rats. Although there is also, this is what my podcast is called, and it's a wonderful animal from Eastern Africa. And it's loved by biologists for a variety of reasons. But it's just a very general interest science news podcast, and we interview um, scientists from all over the world. And it's a podcast about about scientific discovery and people who are behind it. Well, and with the beginning of war, I moved out of Russia for good, like forever. I traveled a lot in the past few years, but this time it was clear that this is without a return ticket. We're not going to return. And within a week, 33 members of the family left Russia, going to different countries. We woke up to those news, and it was clear that I mean, what's happening in Ukraine is a horrible tragedy, but it was clear that this war against civilization, which Putin was waging for the past more than 8 years, came into its terminal phase, and we felt existential danger to stay in the country. And before you would go to a street protest, but you would expect to go to detainment facility for like 2 weeks. You would always have your contact lenses and your medicine ready, but it became clear that things are turning to a much more ugly condition. So we couldn't risk that anymore, and we just left. And since the start of war, my podcast became a podcast about people who cannot continue doing scientific discovery. It was mainly about Ukrainian scientists, and I was privileged to be able to talk to some of them. But speaking of mole rats, by the way, one of the episodes was about an amazing an amazing Ukrainian zoologist who cannot go to war because of his age and health condition. His name is Igor Zagorodnyuk. And it was a story about a mole rat, a sandy mole rat. It's a unique mammal, endemic to Ukraine, with a really tiny habitat. It's minted on Ukrainian coins, and we did an episode about people who did everything to preserve a type specimen. I'm not sure if everyone is aware what that is. When you discover a species, you establish a type specimen collection, and that's a measuring stick of that species. And without that collection, the species doesn't exist, because species is merely an intellectual entity, and this tremendous diversity which surrounds us can only be measured and studied and preserved if we split it onto species. And that game was started by Carl Linnaeus 300 years ago. To preserve a type specimen is extremely important. Without that, you don't have a species. You don't know who to protect. By the way, right now that National Reserve is hit by fire because of rocket attacks and dry season and climate change, maybe. So it is endangered. And that episode was about the zoologists, which did amazing work to preserve type specimen of sandy mole rat throughout 20th century. The people who we talk about were imprisoned by Gestapo and almost shot, and they were imprisoned by they went to Gulag after war. And then their, so to speak, intellectual descendants barely survived a Russian attack in the east of Ukraine 8 years ago. And that guest of an episode, Igor Zagradnyuk, he fled. He was prompted that he was tipped that he has only 24 hours to leave, that separatist and Russian-backed guerrilla man will kill him. And he took just a small city backpack and he fled, and he arranged for this type specimen collection to be smuggled out from eastern Ukraine 8 years ago. And I'm not telling you the whole story, but you can just listen to it if you speak Russian. This invasion also presented danger to this type specimen, and it's a whole other story about museum collection being jeopardized, not only people. And scientists, sometimes some scientists go to war, some scientists die, but others work around the clock to preserve what's in the museums, to preserve their work, to write, to publish papers about Ukrainian zoology. And there's this side to war. There are many sides to war, as I found out, unfortunately, of the past 6 months. The war suddenly changes lives and it turns into hundreds and hundreds of different small things which you don't expect and which you don't read about in the news. And the lives of scientists and their um, resistance resembles obviously lives of other people and their resistance, but it has a certain I don't know how to say, certain peculiarities to it, if I may use the word. So I don't know. That's the story, and right now I'm speaking from Jerusalem. I'm at the Jerusalem Film Festival, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
To guide us a little bit more, let me mention that we're talking right now, hopefully, primarily to people like our university students here in America who may not know much about science, field science in general, though I have been teaching it to them for 30 years. The way scientists, let's start with it. The way scientists are involved and travel in modern world and of course do field work, this makes us one of the most international strata of population anyway, right? So it's not just intelligentsia, it's a very international type of a person to which we belong. Can you tell something about Russian field workers? Did they really in the last 30 years become international?
Yes, very much so. Let me tell you a story of a particular scholar, and you tell me if you call her Russian or Ukrainian. Her name is Olga Shpak. And you might look up an episode of a podcast named Science Versus by Gimlet Academy, unfortunately named Nightmare on Science Street or something like that. Something not really appropriate for this war story. But anyway, let me tell you about a guest of my podcast, a recent episode, and eventually we became friends. Olga Shpak. She was born in the USSR, in Kharkiv, in Ukraine, and raised there. But she went to work in Moscow, and since then she has been studying Arctic marine mammals of Russia in its vast Arctic seas. She has studied many different species, but mainly whales. And just to give you an example of what she does, she goes in a small inflatable boat with a crossbow, because her job is to take biopsies of whales, to take DNA samples. And she would pursue pods of orca whales or bowhead whale. It's a giant whale in the far east of Russia, which was she almost went extinct because of whaling. And by the way, there was lots of whaling under the Soviets, late Soviets. There is a veritable story of genocide to be told about hundreds of thousands of whales killed all around the world by Soviet fleet. But anyway, she once witnessed orca whales, well, not once, I think 6 times at least over one field season, orca whales taking down a huge adolescent bowhead whale. They developed a very sophisticated technique to do so. And this whale is 2-3 times their body weight. And once when I asked her how she feels about it, she says excited, to witness, it's a scientific discovery, to witness something unique in a tiny inflatable boat surrounded by these giant predators. And that's the kind of person she is. And I'll go back to that side of her personality. But going back to your question, Victor, she definitely maintained her Ukrainian identity and ties to her mother town. She kept coming there several times a year. She has family there. But also, she grew to become very international. She has friends and colleagues all over the world. She speaks brilliant English. She travels a lot. These marine mammal scientists are a very particular tribe. International. They bond. They love their whales, and they're united by this giant ocean. So she did a talk at the Japanese symposium, I think, in the middle of February, and she hooked up the phone, or what I would say, she terminated Zoom, and she packed a small city bag and she left to Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second biggest city in Ukraine, and it's just 30 miles away from Russian border. And by late February, it was clear to her that Putin will invade, and she would either go to prison for protesting or to, as she says, mental hospital, because he would not be able to stay put and witness, uh, her mother town being hit. So she came to Kharkiv February 23rd on Wednesday, and she was able to have a great dinner party with her family. And on 24th, he invaded. In 24th, Russia invaded, and Kharkiv was directly hit. And since that it is being directly hit, it was hit badly yesterday with several civilians dead. And she became a city volunteer. She wrote me a message 2 days ago that she's extremely tired and exhausted. But interestingly, you mentioned that scientists are special. She is special. She is the full work under stress. So she's very brave, and she is also very altruistic. People who are used to work in small groups, in closed groups, in under extreme conditions. develop these social traits, which are actually beneficial on the conditions of war, if I may say so. She has this very strong feeling of unity with people she helps, and with the city, and she sacrifices everything to the city. I'm sick worried about her because she never goes to shelter during rocket attacks. She just keeps working. She keeps helping people, spreading food, spreading humanitarian aid, spreading um, medicine. By the way, maybe we could share her details, her banking details, if you would allow, on your page. She and I asked her if she's in contact with her international um, milieu, with her colleagues, uh, marine scientists, because she obviously would never go back to work in Russia. She spends a good chunk of her time consoling Russian scientists, talking to them, her close friends who are severely depressed. She quoted a letter from one of them. Olga, I cannot kill Putin. I cannot even wire you money because this is a crime under Russian law. But I admire you, and so and so. And she responds to him, and this is a special genre, for Ukrainian colleagues consoling their Russian friends who feel completely deprived, depressed, helpless, useless. Um, and she talks to her international colleagues. She says she's got lots of invitations to work in different laboratories, but she's not sure she will. She says she has 10 years worth of work ahead of her restoring the city, and she expects her colleagues to come to Kharkiv after victory to plant trees, because one thing she feels particularly sorry about are giant trees. And I remember those. Kharkiv is a very green city. I was there once when I was 11 years old in the late Soviet times. And I remember, by the way, Kharkiv was already, it felt not Soviet. It felt different. People were smiling in the park, in the streets. And that felt foreign, that felt different. It was considered impolite to smile under the repressive Bolshevik regime. And there was pizza sold in the park. It's the first time I tried pizza. We didn't have that in Moscow. It was very green, and I remember those trees. And I think this is what Putinists and Russists hated most about Ukraine. Its tendency to modernize itself, to develop in the global direction. Sorry, I kind of deviated from your original question, but here's an example. I mean, yeah, of course, field scientists are very internationally minded.
Yes, thank you. We could talk more about this, which is subject obviously so dear to both of us. But your example of Olga was extremely powerful and extremely relevant here, because we see and we daily talk, you and me and many others, we talk to friends in Ukraine, less in Russia. We understand that Russian scientists are under duress, that many of them could not freely talk. And in this sense, I wanted to ask you another sensitive question. What do you think we, Western scientists here, should do about contacts with those now in Russia? Because I see all kinds of the whole spectrum of opinion, from completely cutting ties with anything state sponsored or even state approved, uh, to helping individuals rather than officials. What do you think?
I would love to hear your take. I think you're really involved with that. So I would only answer very briefly, and I would pass it on to you. Well, first and foremost, help to leave. First and foremost thing you can do, you can help people to leave. When the war started, an independent outlet called Troitsky Variant started a anti-war petition, which was immediately signed by thousands and thousands of people. Once Russia installed basically martial law, they had to move it to a separate platform under the threat that the newspaper will be taken down. There's military censorship right now, pretty much in power. But first and foremost, you can help people to leave. And some young scientists might find it easy to leave, but there are some more advanced people who are whose work is really precious, who are desperate. I helped people to relocate, and I know, for instance, of an amazing group. Actually, it's husband and wife, two people, two professors, who just took their cars and drove it across the border, and I helped them to make documents to cross the border with Georgia, ex-Soviet Republic, and then on to Armenia. And they now live in a rural tiny house. They're field workers. They're used to survive, but they are in a really dire condition. They don't have means to survive. They cannot continue their research, and they're amazing zoologists, both of them. So I plead you to help them to leave. We can talk about it later in person. But anyway, I'm just abusing an opportunity here. But if you talk about institutions, I think it's a tough call, and I think it should be nuanced. I think best you can do is try and exercise some sort of nuanced approach. Let me try to bring up a simile, an analogy. Let's say a crime is committed, and you are a judge and you need to decide what to do. The theory of law talks about two approaches, which are usually intertwined and they are parallel. One is pragmatic. You need to stop the crime from from happening, and you need to deter the crime in future. And Russia is a terrorist state, and the world should do anything we can to stop it from being able to wage aggressive genocidal wars. So anything that can help the war definitely should be suffocated as much as we can do. But this is pragmatic side. There's also moral side to dealing with a crime. I don't know what's the right word, redemption. Um, you impose on a criminal certain restrictions which would morally be equivalent to what she did. And I, for instance, totally understand foreign businesses which simply cannot continue to have profits in Russia when children in Ukraine are dying. This is a moral argument, and that's understandable. Um, and dealing with Russian state in any form or shape must be must feel morally unacceptable, and we have instinct to measure that. It's just it might depend on how you feel. You just need to judge your actions with eyes of Ukrainians, with eyes of Ukrainian uh, scientists, or let's say school children. For instance, imagine there's an international Olympiad of mathematics, and Ukrainian children cannot participate because of war. I think it's only fair, for instance, that Russian children could not participate under the Russian flag. That's the least you could do. I mean, one could say that you're taking it out on children, but just try to judge it with the eyes of Ukrainian children, and maybe you will have a solution. Same thing for scientists, right? You need to decide whether or not to collaborate. Let's say in the space science, and we have those international instruments. We use big instruments. They're expensive and they require international collaboration. And this planet is ours to share, and the space is ours to explore. And we should act as mankind, unified, not separated by wars. But again, let's look at this case with this German instrument. And I'm blanking on its name. You might be able to look it up as we speak. But there's this German, let's say, telescope on a big Russian manned satellite. Germans immediately switched it off. at the start of war. They felt that they cannot continue to collaborate with Russian space industry, which was led by this really horrendous person named Rogozin, and with a perfect Nazi-like stance. And I'm sorry, I'm bringing up this Goodwin argument, but I would remind you of a tweet by Goodwin. You know, Goodwin, who said that in each discussion, in each heated argument, people would eventually start comparing the opposite side with Hitler. But recently he tweeted, "Guess what Putin's speech reminds me of." So, I mean, Rogozin, the leader of Russian space industry until recently, has this perfect Nazi-like stand, and I mean, to collaborate with people like that, how would you feel? And but by the way, if we continue looking at that example with telescope, um, um, uh, so Germans switched it off. Rogozin said, "We will hack it within a few months." And interestingly, Russian scientists who were working with it usually are quite politically unsound. They call it politically neutral, although it's borderline immoral often. So they said, no, you should not do that, because if you do it, if you hack that instrument and start using it, our papers will never be accepted in the international magazines. And he said, it sounds like you see your only goal and purpose as to publish in the international magazine, because the man obviously doesn't understand the concept of peer review and that stuff. So it might. I think an easy way to come to a solution might be just a moral argument. Just see how you feel about collaborating with that state, with that institution. Obviously, if it has something to do with war, that's an easy solution, an easy decision. But just last thing I want to say is that this moral argument can be taken to extreme. And I mean, would you approve of decimation? Would you approve of equal amount of Russians just being killed, civilians being killed equal to the amount the Ukrainians were killed? No, you wouldn't approve of civil victims. But you would approve, for instance, of railroad sabotage. And it's going on now, by the way. I'm bringing it up because because it starts, and there is a certain amount of railroad sabotage in Russia, and some trains which take military ammunition are being stopped. And I publicized that on my private Instagram account, just saying, look what's happening. And immediately people came to me, mothers of children, saying, what do you want? You want eye for eye? Do you want our children to die there on their vacations in that region? What if a train collapses and our children die? And obviously that they don't see it as a tiny hair to eye. I mean, it's not eye to eye. These are the trains which are bringing ammunition to kill Ukrainians, and nobody suffered at all. But what I'm trying to say here is, if you think of dealing with Russian state-run scientific institutions, you might use moral argument, but you would not want it to go to the extent of eye to eye for eye. Right? You probably wouldn't want unnecessary suffering.
This is moral question, or many, many moral questions. Thank you for bringing them all. They're rarely discussed. We don't have time now mostly for discussing those. We mostly hear a digest by military experts, and rightly so. But this is very good that you raised them. And surely most, in my position and position of Western scientist, whether expat or not, would agree that at least international conferences in Russia right now better be suspended, because they are all state approved, and rightly because you cannot voice your opposition to war. Even if you come from abroad, you will provoke your friends over there. It's your show, but I have to mention that today or yesterday in St. Petersburg, the Nabokov readings started. And in Pushkinsky Dom, Pushkin's house, the famous place where readings devoted to Vladimir Nabokov have been done for years. And I called on the participants to suspend, to boycott it, because we all know what Vladimir Nabokov would think about holding business as usual um, under the war conditions. I don't think there is any reason to do it. I was answered. I got few replies on all kinds of spectrum, including those from Russia, when people tell me that it's not my place to judge, that I cannot see their pain, and I cannot see their pain. But for at least scientists who are abroad, and of course they don't go to St. Petersburg, it's all by Zoom, I would think the correct gesture would be not to participate, not to pretend that business as usual is order of the day. But I will ask you more about children. You mentioned several times, and we rarely hear about this, but as science educator, you work with school children, I hope you target them at their level. As I watch your podcasts, it's definitely middle to high school level of curiosity. Would you think that Russian generation of young children right now, current generation, would be influenced by this war? What do you project from 10, 20 years right now for your potential audience?
Well, of course, it is influenced severely. It's a generation which was born under autocracy, and this autocracy turned into global genocide and genocidal aggression. And people inside Russia live with this abuser, live under that abuser, and under the cult of brute power, cult of violence, cult of masculinity and or family violence, religion, all kinds of things that can work to strengthen the grip of the autocracy. And school as institution is severely compromised because at all kinds of levels. First of all, since Soviet time, it has functioned as an institute for indoctrination, for institute for subduance. Is it a word? Subversion,
Oppression.
oppression, and it still is. And we could see on social media over this a few months that since the start of war, school children, beginning with 11-year-olds, started to protest here and there, and even 11-year-olds were taken to police and getting told off, getting reprimanded. And if it's a graduate, if it's someone who grew up to start college, this person can be deprived the right to go to college. Students have their own resistance, and there are some prominent groups of students. To name one, that would be DOXA, DOXA. It's a big resistance group, and they are all under house arrest now, facing criminal charges and real sentences, torture. They're being beaten up at street protest. And so that generation is being taught a very direct lesson to behave. And as Nobel laureate Andrei Sakharov said, to paraphrase his quote, you cannot have progress if you don't have human rights. And science has suffered severely from corruption and from the way the state distributes money in an unfair way, and the Institute of Independent Expertise to distribute funds has almost collapsed. So prospect is grim that way.
I will ask another question, which is asked from me all the time, and there is no single answer to this. would you say, as a person who knows much more than I do about medical biology, how brain works, how neurons talk to each other, would you say that we witness, at least to some extent, an epigenetic result of 100 years of all kinds of abuse, not just on human soul, but also on human body in Russia? Talking about, I might fantasize here, talking about severe selection, which happened through the history of last, let's say, 100 years, talking about alcoholic background, talking about constant aggression, which takes place, especially lately, in the families. What we observe from the evidence on young Russian soldiers imprisoned in Ukraine, what is highly publicized, at least here in the West, them talking to their families opens for us very different family structure from what we have seen back in the 70s or 60s. Am I right, or I'm looking at the tip of the issue?
Well, I would argue that, Victor, you probably remember that under Lysenko, in the middle of 20th century, I'm not sure that everybody knows this tremendous story about a particular biologist whose career became so advanced that he was higher up in the Soviet state system than Stalin himself, formally, who convinced the government that he can change wheat into rye and do such things. He didn't believe in genetics, and he claimed that genetics is fascist. And one of the geneticists who opposed him said, if you were right, why every generation the virgins are being born? And he got jailed or even executed. I don't remember. But anyway, I think the Russian state and Russian society is a horrible social experiment, which proves you wrong, Victor. Hundreds of years of severe oppression and of severe selection, negative selection, against intellectuals has not killed the propensity of that land to bear outstanding, wonderful people, productive, smart, and kind, and talented. And Russians living all over the world prove that in every field, in music, in literature, in science. Every generation gives the world these wonderful people. But you are right, I think, at a different degree, at a different level. I would not. I don't think that state oppression does much to genes. There exists this epigenetic channel which you talk about, and there was some work to show that severe stress can be inherited via epigenetic markers, and stress and depression, something like that. But I think much more importantly, social structures have certain inertia to them. They tend to reproduce themselves just like a biological body. And I would refer to you to brilliant work by Professor Richard Pipes. He's a wonderful historian of Russian society, very right-wing, very Republican, I would say, but nevertheless, brilliant in his take of this Russian history of oppression. And I would refer you to another brilliant. So his view on Russian society history really resonates in me as an evolutionary zoologist. I was trained as an evolutionary zoologist, as a morphologist. I studied morphology of vertebrates. And I would say that his idea that police state, there's a concept of police state, a state which is sort of main purpose is to police its citizens, to eavesdrop on their thoughts and persecute their thought crimes, started to develop in the middle of 19th century and gained its peak, as he thought, in 1953 with Stalin's death and started to kind of collapse afterwards. And it's very interesting because for anyone who studies Russian history, the 1917 revolution is absolutely critical. It is considered to be a total pivot in a way. With history thought it was monarchy, it became a communist utopia, anti-utopia. But no, that's a minor thing, according to Pipes. It was a change, something happened, but more importantly, the police state continued to develop even throughout that change. And you could take a similar look to today's Russia. Soviet Union started to fall apart, and in 1991, we thought it's over with it. The Berlin Wall fell, Eastern Europe became liberated, Russia became free. Communist Party was forbidden for a while. I remember that. That was absolutely exhilarating. It was such a joy, the air of freedom in the streets. I was, 16, 15. But a journalist named Sergei Parkhomenko is one of the most followed analysts of what's happening, independently minded journalists of Russian origin. He said, that monster could not have, with its nuclear weapons and its power, could not have collapsed at once, and it didn't. And we just saw that in 10 years after 1991, it became more and more reminding of Soviet times, became more and more oppressive, more and more of a police state. And what we see now is this agony, hopefully, dangerous to the entire world, but the enemy is the same. The values which are being which are dominating now in Russia, the values, the ideas resemble very much the Soviet rhetoric, and it's kind of so. This shows this inertia, this social inertia of state, really sort of reproducing same norms, same ideas throughout generations, and it sticks and it doesn't go. And that way, you're perfectly right.
Yes, thank you so much. State, of course, consists of people, and we're talking the same issue of children and parents as grandparents as usual. We have been talking for 50 minutes, and I'm sure that a glass of water may be due, but also maybe some of our co-hosts and viewers have questions. If you have more time, Ilya,
I absolutely do.
I would ask Stefan or Anara to ask their questions, please. I'm sure we have a lot of.
Maybe I can go first. I was wondering, as a science educator, if you can speak a little bit to misinformation, and if you see any overlap between pro-Putin propaganda and, let's say, COVID denialism. Because at least I'm from Germany, they have sort of the Venn diagram of pro-Putin propaganda, and COVID denialism is basically a circle. So I was wondering what experience you had with that in Russian.
It's a brilliant question, and it's a really interesting topic. First and foremost, Putin's misinformation is a very powerful tool. And what they do, and very successfully, is they always lie about several things at once in a stark contrast, and it destroys the very idea of logic. Bolsheviks had their ideals of communism, which was fake, and they didn't follow that. But Putinists don't have much of an ideology. Their main ideology is cynicism. Everybody lies. That's their main idea. It's a kind of a thug bravery that I can lie to you, blank into your face, and you can do nothing. And that the reason just doesn't exist, and reason doesn't have any meaning. And it's very successful. First of all, there is no war in Ukraine. And if there is war, it's war against Nazis. But we're not killing anyone there. They are staging that. And if we kill someone, these are Nazis. etc., etc. Same with COVID. They started out lying at the same time about several very contrasting things. They would say that there is no epidemic, and this is fake news by Western propaganda. Then they would say that the virus was created in the lab and in the American lab. And then they would say that, then something really interesting happened. Then they would say that there is a pandemic, but we are doing very well and we're containing it. And doctors are not dying like flies, which they did. And Russia does not have the world's top mortality, by the way, top excessive mortality among all the countries in the world, outshadowing even the United States. But it doesn't. These figures are not publicized. So nobody dies, not even doctors, but the virus exists, so we have to lock you down. There will be a lockdown, but Putin will stay away from it. Putin will not impose strict measures. This would be city mayors who would do that. And then, so we have to observe certain restrictions now, although virus is fake news, but we have to follow certain restrictions. And they would be severe, and police would do all kinds of abuse to impose this on people. And of course, any kind of free protest or street protest will be forbidden. And people would get real jail sentences for picketing just one by one because they break sanitary norms of COVID times. But then something even more important happened. The vaccine race. And the vaccine race to vaccinate people was a total disaster. I don't know if you followed, but data shows, and independent data shows, that miraculously Russia came up with one working vaccine. Down the road, they broke all possible rules of scientific research. They tested it on themselves, on soldiers, and on doctors. But once they've tested it on 40,000 people, they could prove that it's safe and it's efficient. So they wanted to vaccinate many, many people. At the same time, they produced 2 fake vaccines, which were not working, but financial interests of government members were involved. So they had to impose that on people. But at the same time, they needed not to let foreign vaccines into the country. They banned foreign vaccines. So how they did that, they started this information war in the media. They started focusing on cases of 20 people dying from complications out of the tens of millions being vaccinated by each of the big Western vaccines. So they had to lie at the same time that Western vaccines are dangerous, but all Russian vaccines are super efficient. But it only caused absolute anti-vax unity in Russian population. Everyone, intellectuals, dissidents, mainly doctors, became strong anti-vaxxers. This is the only doctors community in the world which is very strong anti-vaccine, because they know that state can only do you bad. And lots of people died because they were either not vaccinated with Sputnik or vaccinated with the other 2 vaccines, which are not working. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Anara.
Okay, thank you very much for your remarkable discussion. I remember I met several years ago a woman. She actually highly educated, and it was before Ukraine, and she was very proud of Putin. She said, now the world respects Putin. So it was very sincere feeling, sentiment. And my question, what makes Putin or Putinism popular in Russia and in the near abroad? In the near abroad, Putin is relatively popular. And we just imagine situation, Putin dies or disappears, and Putin, like a leader, may appear again, and he might be more shrewd administrator, more energetic, but it's just somehow connected with not only Russia, it's a former Soviet Union, because if we can imagine situation that Ukraine might be like Russia today, and Russia could be like Ukraine today, a victim. So that's the problem. is more wider than just propaganda, what we can hear today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And obviously, I don't have an answer to that. It's not an easy problem to solve. Obviously, nothing will ruin a holiday, a celebration for us when Putin dies. That will be the day when we celebrate. But Putinism obviously is even more dangerous than Putin himself. And it will continue to self-perpetrate. I think what social sciences tell us is that autocracy tends to self-perpetrate because it successfully plays against certain anxieties in people, and the Russians always had enough reasons for anxieties, wars, famines, and inequality, slavery. People are easily bullied into what one of the scholars called mobilization. There was this prominent scholar whose name was Levada. If you're interested in Homo Sovieticus, you should look up his work. He came up with the concept Homo Sovieticus, the Soviet man, Soviet person. And he described that he started working in 50s in China, by the way. And then he moved on to study Soviets under the Soviets. And he did some clandestine public opinion questionnaires even before Perestroika. But after Perestroika, they made giant questionnaires. And it showed that Russian people were still at war, so to speak. They were still mobilized around certain symbols. When they were asked in, I think, 1989, what is the main common, most important symbol for them in the past? Usually you have a certain distribution. In a nation which is not at war, you would have a distribution of different dates. Imagine that you ask French. They would call on French Revolution, maybe on de Gaulle, maybe on Second World War, maybe on something else. Russians were absolutely united, 90%, around the 9th of May, 1945, about what they call victory and Victory Day. And that showed that this nation is still at war. And study of that phenomenon showed that their myth of war is very special. There were no allies. And there was no help from America, so one on its own. Not that many victims, although Russia buried like tens of millions of its people. The war was completely unprovoked, and there was no union between Hitler and Stalin. Russians just have no idea that they were allies and that Russian officers trained Nazi army. So they had that myth, very proud and very aggressive. It's not a day to remember the dead. It's the day to think about future victories. And it mobilizes people. It neglects the values of freedom, of private lives, of the value of human lives, the values of individuals. It mobilizes everything around that Tsar figure. And when Russia had several elections during 90s, the social research showed that the runners for the chair can have different advantages. For instance, if it's a man, if he's tall, he has more chances to win. But there is one particular advantage, one particular trait, which would make him an absolute winner, and that being already a president. You don't change a president. And I came a lot of time to the ballot to observe, to monitor, or even to give out the ballots. And these people came to vote, and they said, okay, where are we choosing Putin here? It's like we're not electing president, we're electing Putin for like the zillionth time. It's a ritual when once in 4 years they come and they bow to the authority. Of course, not everyone is like that. And again, let me stress, there is a considerable and heroic resistance in Putinist Russia. Still going on. Many people fled, but many more stayed, openly protesting against war, getting real jail sentences for that.
Thank you, Ilya. We see this resistance from here. We don't know about most, but still what we see, what everyone can see, doesn't fill us with feeling that this resistance may prevail from below by itself without military defeat of the system. Does anyone have more questions? Guests, maybe? You can ask your question in chat if you wish. I see some friends listening live here.
I'd like to
Please.
ask Ilya a question, Victor.
Yes.
Having to do with Chechnya, some of the reading I've done indicates that there is a growing resistance coming about once again in Chechnya. Have you heard anything about that? Can you confirm is that true or not? And what about other areas within Russia? Do you pick up on signs of people wanting to revolt from the federal government?
It's interesting that you brought up Chechnya because it's the most cemented autocracy. It's the most firm and absolutely atrocious. They keep killing people without trial all that time. But even there are dissidents. Even there is resistance. Even there are secret telegram chats. Much everywhere, people are drawing graffiti, people are wearing certain insignia, doing tattoos, protesting now more secretively or openly. And many people are in jail now, thousands of people, and many people talk on social media that they are prepared to go to jail, but they will not leave the country. And I think that's all I can say about that. There obviously is a protest. I think it's not for me to judge the potential of that protest and what can happen in the future. It's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future, as one baseball coach said. I cannot tell you what's going to happen next.
Yes, thank you for quoting Yogi Berra. When I teach evolution, I always tell my students his phrase, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And this is all we can say about future. As our friends might prepare more couple of questions, let me not forget to ask you about the mole rat, your favorite animal. I never seen one live, but I know they were prized even back in the 70s when people worked with them in Moscow Zoo or university. And what I gather is that they have social structure which humans could benefit from. Could you say a couple of words about mole rats?
Well, I would ask you if you consider that an anti-utopia, a dystopia. But yeah, I once asked Scott Kelly, this outstanding astronaut who spent most time of all people on International Space Station, what's the biggest duress, what's the biggest hardship for human body, for human mind to stay in the space? Is it lack of oxygen? Is it lack of gravity? And he said for interplanetary travel, the biggest the problem is dealing with people in a small, closed community. Just the ones you meet at your kitchen table at the coffee machine each day, same people. And I asked him which animal genes we should take to genetically edit the future astronauts once we do that. And what he answered made me feel of naked mole rat, because they are champions of cooperation. They live like ants. They are eusocial. They only eusocial mammal. They have queens, and only queens reproduce, and the rest are soldiers. Victor, I don't know what you say about that society, but they're super friendly. They attack another colony when they kill them and enslave them. One scientist showed that they can take away soldiers and enslave them, and then become members of their own colonies. Most interesting is work of Rachel Blumenstein. She now works for Alphabet, Google. She was the first one to notice that they live forever. She was born in South Africa, and she took them to States, a colony of those. They're amazing to be kept in captivity in colonies. I saw some at Moscow State University, and now I'm about to visit a colony in Jerusalem here. They're just like ants. You build these tubes for them, like for leaf cutter ants, and chambers, and they distribute roles to these chambers. Where is the queen? Where are the feeding chambers? Where do they rear their offspring? And she brought them to States, and she saw that they live until 30 years, and by their size, and they have this peculiar size, bigger than mouse a little bit, but smaller than a rat. So they are really curious. You know, you look at them and you see an animal which has the age of an old chimpanzee, all wrinkled and naked, like the name tells us. So she saw that they live forever. So this longevity became the main, you know, holy grail for longevity sciences. Why do they live for so long? There was this tremendous study by Harvard professor Vadim Gladyshev. I recommend you to invite him, and he can tell you all about that.
Thank you so much. We have to turn back to Homo sapiens, or whatever our name would be classified by future primatologists, if they decide to restore some of the Linnean names, which are not so nice. But I think sapiens still has priority in taxonomy. Anyone, please ask more questions about humans. People are absolutely astounded, I'm sure. We never had a speaker in my university with that good delivery. We should probably employ it remotely. Thank you so much.
It's so kind of you.
Well, we can talk more. I'm sure we will invite you again as things develop, because when I haven't asked your anything about your personal story. You gave us a link to New Yorker, which told Masha Gesson wrote a little bit about your extended family. But if you care to give us maybe some more personal perspective on, again, this flight of Russian generation, and especially educationally, on what impact it can make on the families from your own experience, because your children and others' children will not be in foreign countries subject to the same education as in Russia. So the hope is they will grow differently.
Well, people like us, you know, we're living for many years in a ghetto-like situation. We would have very particular schools, very particular teachers, particular educators who would be, you know, who would be detained and stay at the police station 3 times a year, like we did, and we would not be afraid that, I don't know, these pseudo-patriotic or religious or homophobic values would be implied on our children. This would be some small schools, either state-run schools or private schools, where rules would be different. And I have to tell you that a whole generation of educators during the last 30 years were able to develop amazing institutes, amazing education centers, and from very young people who usually would emigrate or go on to work for high tech or something like that, maybe fashion design or computer industry. Russia had that. It's collapsing right now. It's falling apart very rapidly. So to give you an example, when we fled to Georgia, and it was quite adventurous because tickets were running sparse, and there was shortage of animal cages in the city, to buy cages to fly with dogs. And right now I'm being told that rabies vaccine is there is shortage of that, and people can vaccinate their dogs to fly. By the way, this probably means that we should expect rabies epidemic, because in Russia they just don't have vaccines anymore. But anyway, we were able to fly, and some of the planes were canceled, and people were buying tickets, to fly via Mongolia or Uzbekistan or Nepal or Maldives, anywhere. And some people were in direct danger of imprisonment, so we were especially afraid for those, and they made it safe. Once we found ourselves in Tbilisi, its capital of Georgia, we found that most of those school teachers also fled, and immediately they started such schools. And I know now at least of several such schools in Montenegro, in Israel, and in Georgia, which was started by these recent Russian migrants. I wouldn't call refugees migrants. And they're accepting children, and our children stayed at such schools for like 3 months. But now we moved on, and they to start them at British schools. You find international British schools in most cities, and that's what we did. So
Thank you so much. We would love you to send us privately any links to charities or donation funds. We put everything on our webpage right here
Thank you so much.
on the same website.
That's very generous of you, and thanks for having me. I'll send you links.
Thank you so much. Do we have more questions? If not, I will be very pleased to maintain contact with Ilya. We thank you for being with us, and we wish you all the best, of course, and we will stay in touch. It's so remarkable that technology allows us to talk, and so tragic that we need these tragic times to connect. But last 5 months have been a huge educational event for most of the planet. I hope so. And maybe this war, 100 years ago, H.G. Wells coined the phrase, the war to end all wars. I don't believe it will be, but maybe it will restart something, restructure something, especially considering technology, because there was no war in history of humankind, which was going on in front of our eyes. The entire planet can experience fatigue, but they cannot refuse to watch because people are hooked on media now. They need their dopamine.
Let's hope that life provides us with a safer source of dopamine.
Thank you so much for being with us again. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Мы желаем военной победы. We wish for war victory, and to all our viewers in Ukraine and worldwide. Thank you for watching. We will continue. Goodbye. The recording is off, so we can have if some